Okay, there we go. Good morning. Thank you, Kenny. Here we are at the end of the year, and we are so blessed here at Northside to have a guy like Kenny leading our worship for us every Sunday. And I know you're pointing to God, and that's what makes you such a great leader of our worship, Kenny. So thank you so much. We're really blessed. All right. Well, good morning, Northside. It is great to be with you on this very last day of the year. Happy New Year's Eve. Happy New Year's Eve, because some of you are sitting here thinking, thank goodness this year is over. But not all of you. Some of you have had a good year. This year, at the end of the year, it presents us, I think, a unique opportunity to be here on the very last day of the year. Now, one of the lines from the song that Kenny was singing just a minute, I think the first song we started with, Near to Me. Is that what it's called? Near, put you on the spot. One of the lines says, "Shelter me safe in that haven of rest." And that what a beautiful prayer for the year to come. Shelter me safe in that haven of rest. However, we have some things to talk about first of the year 2023, but that can be a beautiful prayer in the year 2024. Thank you, Kenny, for all the time and effort and work and thought you put into the songs that we sing to God every Sunday. Thank you. It is a unique opportunity that we are presented with today to talk about the year that has come, the year that has been, rather, and to talk about the year to come. So if you were to, I don't know, can you hit my next slide? I don't have my clicker, I don't think. So when you see this, when you think about the year 2023, what comes to mind? I would say that several things come to mind if you think about that for very long. But if you had to put one word on it, if you had to say 2023 was the year of this, or one phrase. I did this last Wednesday with our teens in our Bible class, and we kind of went around the circle, and I said, all right, if you had to put a word on the year 2023, what would it be? What would that word be? And I'm going to ask you guys to do the same, all right? I want you to think about that, and I want you to share it with the person sitting beside you. It can be a phrase. I'll give you a little bit more than just one word. How would you describe the year 2023 in a word or a phrase? We'll do that for just a second. No bad words now, okay? All right, I know some of you have had a hard year, but we're at church right now. Thank you, Diane. All right. So I posed that question to our teens the other night in class, and here are just some of the things that they shared with me as they, just some of them. We had several kids in class, and here's some of the things that they shared. They said, a crazy year. It's been a crazy year. Just a lot of new things that happened and took place this year. Different, hard, challenging, a lot of change, a lot of transition. Those are just some of the words that I heard, and I couldn't really hear what you guys were saying, but what would your phrase be? Now, I could not hear specifically what any of you were saying, but sometimes when you're up here, you can kind of read the room a little, and read the moans and groans based on what you might have asked a group of people. But I know some of you, and so even if I couldn't hear how your year went, I know some of you well enough to know that some of you have had some very significant health challenges this year. When you think back to the year that's been 2023, some of you have had some significant health challenges, or those that you've loved have had some significant health challenges. And here you are, and thank God that you're here. Some of you have lost loved ones that were very dear to you this year, and that, of course, is always challenging. Some of you, as you know, as I look around, you've had some people let you down this year, and so you're just disappointed. You come into at the end of the year disappointed, and some of you have been stretched in ways this year that you would have never expected that you would have been stretched this year. And it's easy, I think, as we come to the end of the year, to kind of sit back and I don't know about you, but for me, kind of dwell on and think about and focus on some of the more difficult and harder aspects of the year. But I know some of you have had a good year too. The other day we were talking in a meeting, and Diane was like, well, I've had a great year. I've got a new grandbaby. And well, Diane, not all of us had beautiful, sweet, adorable grandchildren this year. We are happy, very happy for you guys. But yeah, there's been a lot of things to celebrate this year as well. But I do think there is a sense in which it is worth our time and even difficulty to kind of reflect on a year like 2023. I actually looked up on the internet what are the biggest events that happened in the year 2023. And as I was reading through that, some of you may have seen some of those year recaps where they just tell you everything that happened in the year, and you start watching it and you're like, oh, I forgot that was this year. That happened as well. So this year, here are just some of the biggest events that, according to, I don't know, people, were the biggest things that happened, just out there in the world. You heard a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, this year. I feel like I heard that every other day somewhere I went. And not only all the good that it can do, but of course also all the challenges and dangers that come along with it. This year there was an auto workers strike. There was a Hollywood strike. Yeah, I know some of you just couldn't stand that. There was, of course, the war in Ukraine continued. There was the October 7th, even more recently, attacks in Israel, a terrorist attack, and of course the resulting war in Gaza, which has been in the news a lot. The Covenant school shooting. There was that, back in June, remember the tourists that were on that submersible Titan thing that was exploring the Titanic with a Xbox controller, basically. Remember the spy balloon? All that. And then evidently, UFOs and aliens are things that we are talking about in serious places as well. I thought they were. But then none of that, in some ways, compares to the biggest news story that has flooded everybody's news feeds, and that is this right here. All right? And some of us are I just thought this picture was hilarious, too. I'm tired of seeing that. Each of those stories and more were stories that sort of dominated our news feeds for a period of time. And many of them, maybe you haven't thought about in months. If you're like me, some of those I was like, oh gosh, I forgot that was this year too. Because in a lot of ways, those are stories that are out there. Those are things that are happening to other people in other places. But this can also, sometimes our memory can also fade from some of the things that happened a little bit closer to home, and some of the things that happened in our own world a little bit. And our church family has had an eventful 2023, to say the least. I actually was thinking about this as we were preparing for the sermon today. And I wanted to ask our ministry leaders, those in our congregation who volunteer to lead certain ministries in our church, if they could kind of help me remember just some of the great victories that we have to celebrate this year as we come to the end of the year. Not to like pat ourselves on the back, but to say, hey, look what God did. Look what God did with these people when we made ourselves available to Him. And so I want to read some of the things that I received back. I contacted our leaders, our ministry leaders, and our elders, and just asked them to share a few things. And I heard back from several of our ministry leaders, and I just wanted to share some of the things that they shared. And this is really good. I think this is important to share. So talked with Miss Jean, got back with me. She's a lead of our hospitality ministry. And she says this. She said one guest commented that he was spoken to about 17 times before he got through the foyer. She says, I happened to have been watching as the hospitality team was a very big part of that, but kudos also to random members who also spoke to him. She says, the moment, and I thought this was really neat. I'm glad you said this. The moment was especially meaningful to me as I had just recently visited a congregation where no one, not a single person, spoke to me. It should never be that somebody should come into our church building and not be spoken to. So thank you so much, Miss Jean, for all that you do for the hospitality ministry and all the ways in which that helps, I think, people to feel more welcome coming into this building. Sometimes we forget just how much it takes for someone to walk into a church building that maybe is not familiar with that. And so thank you to all those that are on the hospitality team. Deb Flowers shared with me an email. She got back with me about the meal ministry, and I know several of you are involved in a lot of these ministries. But here's what she says. Northside members provided a dinner meal the first Sunday of every month for the residents at TPOM, Tennessee Prison Outreach Ministry. Every month, Northside prepares a meal that allows 30 to 40 current residents and former residents to fill themselves with food, prepared knowing that they are loved. Every month. Northside also members provide meals to those members that are sick or have family members that are sick that need a little extra help due to a variety of reasons, sickness, surgery, etc., all sorts of things. Amqui Elementary, just right down the road. They were in need, we found out, after the most recent tornado just a couple weeks ago. And so Northside got word of that need, and food was supplied for several students so that they would have a meal once they got home for themselves and for their families. You may not have even known that, but that was something that also was happening in the last couple weeks. Northside provided meals for several families after the death of loved ones. And she just says, I would like to thank everyone for helping make the meal ministry what it is. The ministry only happens because Northside members always show up. And then a little commercial. If you are interested in helping in this ministry, there is a place for you. And I think what you said here is so perfect, Ms. Deb. It says, providing a dish or a meal or monetary support helps others in ways that words just cannot do justice. So thank you for all those that have helped with that ministry this year as well. Prayer ministry. All right, talked to Mickey. Mickey got back with me on that. She says, looking back, the things that stand out for me in the prayer ministry is seeing how many folks have allowed us to pray for them, their family, and friends. We started with just a few each week, and it continues to grow, showing us that Northside is a prayer-believing church. The Impossible Board, we've talked a lot about that this year. That's new this year. Has been an encouragement to those who are not on the prayer ministry to be a vital part of praying with and for each other. And man, what a year of answered prayers it's been. And I can't help but think of a couple of people. I think of Miss Marcia and a way in which God just answered so many prayers on our behalf for you, Miss Willie as well. Just so many. And I even hate to say names, but you guys know there's been a lot of prayer answered this year. I want to say thank you again. I've tried to say this throughout the year to all those that helped. And so many ministries were involved in this next one, and that it just, probably every ministry in some way or another. But this summer, Northside hosted the Nashville Work Camp Homeowner Banquet. And I'll just tell you, that was a great success. So many great words of affirmation for what we were doing and what we were trying to do and try to welcome and encourage those in our community to feel welcome. So many great things I heard about that. This summer at Vacation Bible School, we were able to, of course, this is in addition just to an awesome, VBS that we have every year where we're teaching and learning and about God in really fun and cool ways that are age appropriate. Well, in addition to all that, we also, I don't know if you remember this, but we sent 5 kids to school for a year with money that was brought in from those kids and that was raised during that week. We relaunched our small group ministry this year. Some of us went Christmas caroling a few weeks ago. We had a creation exhibit, So those are some things that as you think about the year 2023, sometimes all those things tend to kind of just be forgotten if we aren't careful and often don't just step back and say, wow, God did some really amazing things through this church family this year. And listen, I already know what some of you are saying. Well, you're only sharing the good stuff, Chris. I know. I know. Yes, it has also been a very difficult year for our church family. To be honest, one of the most difficult that I can recall in all the years I've been here. Cora Snell, Jim Ingram, Charles Howard, Howard Hunter, Mary Powell, Dorothola Merritt, Naomi Smith. These are saints that we've lost this year. These are huge gaps. These are people and lives that there's no way to replace. Now say those names, and we can say those names with a sense of, yes, obviously pain, but also joy, because we know that, man, think of all the ways that we've all been blessed because of those lives. So many of us. And also, they're with Jesus. Like, we believe that, right? We believe that they are with Jesus. But it's still, those are hard things to face as a church family. Of course, none of us were expecting Jonathan and his family to leave in June. And then, of course, the resulting preacher search and all that goes along with that. And then, of course, there were other things as well. So it has been a very eventful year in this family, right in our own, right here, this year, to say the least. So if I told you a story about a church, let's just don't pretend it's not Northside for a minute. If I told you a story about a church, and I told you that this church had the kind of year that we have had, with all the good, with all the pure and the right, and the powerful and the mighty. And then I also told you about all the hard and the difficult and the chaotic and the bad. How would you feel about that church as it moves into the future and as it moves into the new year? How would you feel? Well, I think one thing you would certainly feel would be a great deal of anticipation for the year to come. And that's actually not an uncommon place, as we think about it, for God's people to be in a place of great anticipation. Now, anticipation for good, anticipation for bad, yet to be determined, right? But anticipation for all that we've been through and all the places that we want to go. Have you ever been anxious for something to happen? Well, of course you have. Some of you, it was probably last week as you were waiting for Christmas. But that feeling of anticipation is a common theme throughout Scripture. The idea of hope, just in general in Scripture, is tied to the idea of anxiously anticipating what God is going to do. And this is a feeling that Israel has as the temple was being built and then dedicated. And you have to understand the anticipation that was accompanying the Israelites during this time. I think you have to understand their journey for just a second. And I know you know the story, so we won't go into a whole lot of detail. But understanding Israel's journey helps you to understand why there was so much anticipation for the temple. Of course, you know that their story begins in many ways in slavery and in bondage in Egypt. Of course, God rescues them. He hears their cry. He rescues them out of the bondage and slavery. But then there's a period of time where they're wandering around in the desert. And then, of course, during that time, God gives them the law, and they set up the tabernacle, which is to be the presence of God, but it's a temporary dwelling. And so then ultimately God gives them the promised land, and then they're ruled for a period of time by the judges, and then, of course, King David. Well, God makes a covenant with King David. And a part of that covenant that he makes with King David is that there will always be someone from your line that sits on the throne over his people. As that temple is being completed, and it was about a 7-year project, you can imagine the people as they're sitting there watching a little bit of it be built every day and anticipating the ways in which God's presence is going to rest within the people's, just rest within them and be right there in their midst. You can imagine how excited they were for that to be completed. and all the anticipation that would go on with that in the years to come as God is inhabiting in them and as the protection that he would offer. Well, so as a part of that, Solomon now, David's son, dedicates this. He wants to dedicate this temple to the Lord, and he begins by a prayer. And this prayer you can read in 1 Kings 8:22 through 26. I want to read part of that. I'm not going to read the whole prayer. It's pretty long, but I'm going to read part of it. So if you got your Bible, you can turn to 1 Kings chapter 8, and we'll be in verse 22. And says this, Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in front of the whole assembly of Israel, spread out his hands towards the heavens and said, Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you, in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to your servant David, my father. With your mouth you have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today. Now, Lord, the God of Israel, keep for your servant David, my father, the promises you made to him when you said, You shall never fail to have a successor to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your descendants are careful in all they do to walk before me faithfully as you have done. And now, God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David, my father, come true. So as this prayer continues, and it does continue for several more verses, Solomon prays that the people, that God's people, the Israelites, that they would always turn back to God, and that they would live the right way, and that God would protect them from their enemies, and that he would allow them to prosper. Ultimately, the temple is dedicated, and then after that, there's like a celebration, and it's like a 2-week-long, joyful celebration. It says in verse 66, it says, They blessed the king and went home joyful and glad in heart for all the good things the Lord had done. Hallelujah, the temple is here, God's presence is now resting among his people, and then in the very next chapter, God has some words for the top. God has some words for the leadership at the very top, and so he goes straight to Solomon. And I think that this is such an important moment in Israel's history, because if you think about it, here they are standing right at the precipice of either great success moving forward into the future or potentially great failure. It's sort of a turning point and a decision-making point in the life of Israel. And so here's some of what God says to Solomon as the temple has just been dedicated. And this is in chapter 9, so starting in verse 1 of chapter 9. When Solomon had finished building the temple of the Lord and the royal palace and achieved all he had desired to do, the Lord appeared to him a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. And the Lord said to him, I have heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple, which you have built, by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, if you walk before me faithfully with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command, and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father when I said, You shall never fail to have a successor sit on the throne of Israel. So, the word he says is, if your leadership, Solomon, is strong, then guess what? The future is bright. And that's good news, right? But that's not where it ends, because he continues, God does. In verse 6 he says, But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them, and I will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword, an object of ridicule among all peoples. This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, "Why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple?" People will answer, "Because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods," lowercase g, "and worshiping and serving them. That is why the Lord has brought this disaster on them." So strong words. Great potential, great warnings. Well, and some of you are strong Bible students here in the auditorium this morning, and you know how this ended up for Israel. As it turns out, bad leadership was the norm for Israel. Every now and then a good king would come along, but the whole system, the whole thing was corrupt. And so Israel suffered. Their enemies were successful against them. There was a lot of infighting. There's rampant sin and idolatry, a lot of chaos. And Israel and its leadership, time and again, turned their back on God. And eventually, as you guys know, you can read it, the people find themselves with a destroyed temple and living in exile. Now, of course, it took a while for them to get there. But it's not hard to look at that moment as Israel stood right at the precipice of untold potential. God's presence right there in their midst. All they had to do was be faithful to God, honor Him, walk in His ways. And they didn't. That's why God had to provide a different way. Many will blame ancient Israel's downfall on bad leadership, and leadership is very important. But human leadership, as we know all too well, has its limitations. As Israel's kings, one after another, proved, they simply did not, by and large, walk with the Lord. But as Christians, we have a different king. Jesus is our king. He is the king who got it right. He is the king who left his home in heaven. He is the king who resisted temptation. He is the king who healed and taught and lived and fed, reversing the effects of the fall. He's the king who washed feet. He's the king who suffered and died, but he's also the king who was raised to new life. This is the king who left his spirit for his followers so that the presence of God would no longer be held in any building for that matter, but be held instead in the hearts and lives of his people. That's the king that we follow. That's our lead. So, I don't know what the year 2024 has in store for us. So I'm not a prophet, but I do have a little bit of confidence to make a few predictions for the year to come. There are going to be some difficulties this year, all right? There are going to be some challenges that we encounter. There are going to be some wonderful things that happen this year. There are. There are going to be some great things that happen. There are going to be some unexpected things. Some of those unexpected things are going to be great, and some of them are probably going to be challenging. There's going to be some opportunities for you to step up. And there are going to be some opportunities for you to put more faith in God in the year to come. It's about as much as I feel safe guessing about the year to come. Yeah, I know, it's a little vague. But there's actually a couple other things I suspect as well about the year to come. And that is this. If we are faithful to God, if we trust in Him, if we walk before God faithfully with integrity of heart and uprightness, well, then I believe that the future will be bright. Now, that doesn't mean easy, just that God, as He always has before, will get us through again. But if we turn away from God in the year to come and don't observe the commands that He has given us and worship other gods or get distracted with things that don't matter, well then the warning we read this morning is a reminder that we ought to probably buckle up and be prepared for a very bumpy ride in the year 2024. So today is a day of great anticipation. We anticipate great things for the year to come, but we should also be mindful of where we've been, and we should also be mindful that if we want a bright future, then it starts at the top, and it starts with us following God in the year to come. If there's anything holding you back today from making a commitment to follow Jesus, well, I really can't think of a better time than right now to make that commitment to Jesus. Start this new year off right. But if you need anything at all, anything that we can help you with, well, then I encourage you to come forward as we stand and sing, and find a way throughout the week to talk to us as well. Thank you. Kenny?